Welcome to the Filmlings podcast.
A bi-weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is episode 119, Taiwanese New Wave.
Yeah, which is a lot of words and hard to alliterate, so we're just going to stick with Taiwanese New Wave, which in and of itself is a bit of a simplification, but it's a topic that I really enjoy, and I've kind of had to space out my enjoyment of it, which we'll get into why. Jonathan, I think you're a little newer to it, but let's talk about what the Taiwanese New Wave actually is. So for those of you who don't know, Taiwan is a small country off the coast of China that is a large island, and it essentially is kind of like China, but not China. There's a very complicated historical context to why it sees itself as China, and mainland China sees itself as China. There's a civil war, and the losers ended up on Taiwan. And that actually plays a part in the plot of one of the movies we're going to talk about today. But when we talk about Taiwanese cinema, we've actually mentioned it before on the podcast in the context of King Hu, who did a lot of wuxia films. And actually Taiwan...
We've also done two Ang Lee films, but only one of them from his Taiwan period.
Yeah. This will be our third Ang Lee film. He's kind of all over the place. He does a lot of different kinds of movies.
Yeah.
Does not limit himself in what he does as a director.
Yeah,
sometimes
he's pretty ingrained
in a good
himself
way
in
and
Western
sometimes
film
in a bad
at this
way.
point, though.
Yeah. But yeah, Taiwan was kind of like this hotbed of wuxia filmmaking in the 40s and 50s, and even into the 60s and 70s. But then in the 80s, there was this, what was called the first new wave of the Taiwanese cinema, because there's two new waves here. And this is a set of films that tend to be more focused on down-to-earth, sympathetic portrayals of everyday life in Taiwan. And this is kind of a direct response to the making of wuxia or kung fu films that tended to be historical and large action set-piece movies, which, if that's ringing bells as like what happened in Europe following World War II, there's a reason this is called the New Wave. It definitely
in Europe,
is.
They were making stuffy period dramas.
Yeah. No, much less kung fu in those. Some would say no kung fu in those.
Some,
but none. Anyway, in around 1990, this one is a little less defined, but the films have become so distinct by now that you kind of have to call it a different thing. And this lasted from 1990 to 2010, the second new wave of Taiwanese cinema. And this featured movies that tended to be a little less serious or a little less super serious and more accessible to the mainstream. And the big hallmark is an introduction of humor or some lightheartedness into all of the drama. Because don't get me wrong, the two movies we have today that come from the second new wave are very serious and dramatic and tragic in a lot of ways, but also they have a lot of humor in them. Whereas the first movie we're going to talk about today,
which is
A City of Sadness, literally, which is from the first new wave and is very sad. It's very good, but it's very sad. So A City of Sadness is our first film today from 1989, directed by Hsiao-Hsien, or maybe Hsiao-Hsien Hao. I probably should have looked up a pronunciation beforehand. I apologize. Then Eat, Drink, Man, Woman from 1994, or birth year, Jonathan, so it's old too.
What?
Directed by Ang Lee. And this one actually got an Oscar nomination for Best Foreign Film. And this is one of the very early works of Ang Lee. It actually becomes part of it's the first entry in his Father Knows Best trilogy. And it's kind of when he started to get attention from the West, which plays a large part in his later career. And then finally, Yi Yi, directed by Edward Yang, who might be my favorite Taiwanese New Wave director. And Yi Yi literally translates to 1-1, but more connotatively, it means like 1 by 1, or is given the English title a 1 and a 2. So kind of like this idea of moving through this dance of life, There they go one by one, and we'll get into all of that. There are a lot of existential feelings in that movie.
Yeah.
But yes, Jonathan, without further ado, let's jump into The City of Sadness, or A City of Sadness, from 1989. Jason, take it away.
A City of Sadness from 1989. The Lin family lives in a coastal city near Taipei, Taiwan, in the period of time following the ousting of the Japanese Empire and during the occupation by mainland China's Nationalist Party. The oldest, Lin Wenhuang, is the owner of a bar and burgeoning patriarch of the family. The middle brother, Lin Wenxing, is deaf and an aspiring photographer. The younger brother, Lin Wenlung, deals with the trauma he suffered during World War II. The lives of the three brothers are swept up in the changing nature of the era.
All right, Jonathan, I have seen, not this movie before, but I've seen other Hsiao-Hsien films, and I was wondering what your first impressions of his style were.
Yeah, so we didn't just do Ozu, but we're pretty fresh off of Ozu, and so that was very forefront in my mind, actually during all three of these, but specifically City of Sadness and Yi to some extent, but very kind of in that line of almost transcendental, where the long shots of just watching things happen, and the kind of the moments where we'll be taken out of whatever's happening and we'll just be seeing the landscape or whatever. So that, from a stylistic point of view, that was kind of the first thing that I was thinking, is that this is coming very much from an Ozu type of tradition. And then the plot, this one actually took me a while to kind of get into. There's so much going on in the movie with the three brothers, or four brothers. One of them,
four brothers, but one's dead. Like at the start
one
of the
we
movie.
never see. I was actually trying to figure out, because we do some flashing back and stuff like that. So a lot of the movie, I was honestly trying to play catch up and just make sure that I have all the characters and all the like plot points straight. But beyond all that, there's definitely an atmosphere that the film creates that is very reflexive, and it feels very kind of, I guess, patriotic in a way. It's kind of like a love letter to Taiwan through showing this big political struggle that Taiwan was going through.
I think it's like a love letter to the people of Taiwan.
Yeah.
More than it is to the Taiwanese government.
Like the spirit. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you could definitely say the spirit of Taiwan.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
No, that's fair. That's one of the big challenges I have with Taiwanese New Wave cinema. And that's just part of the experience of watching a movie that it's in a foreign language, is long, and isn't super forthright with its plot. The plot tends to be like you were mentioning Ozu. There's a lot of ellipses in here. There's a lot of understanding what's going on through piecing things together. And that's one thing to do when you're already working in your native language and you just have to be paying attention and piecing it together. It's different when you're kind of like speed reading a novel. And
there's a little bit of political background that you have to have. Like they do an amount of setup, but if you're not already familiar,
it relies on some cultural context. This is definitely
that if you're not familiar, you're playing a lot of catch up as you're going along.
Yeah, this is definitely made for Taiwanese people. Like, this is not made for people who don't speak the language.
I will say one of the interesting things about the plot is the story with the older brother, which ends up kind of being the primary storyline of the brothers. Although is the deaf brother the youngest one or the second youngest?
The deaf brother is the youngest brother.
Yeah, so the deaf brother is kind of our protagonist, but the oldest brother takes up a lot of the plot time, and his storyline almost ended up feeling kind of Godfather-ish. Which was really interesting.
Yeah, no, there's a big focus here actually on family, and there's a big focus on family in all three of these movies.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You get a sense that a large family, and not just a large family, but a large, very structured family where everyone kind of has this Yeah, everyone kind of has this role they play that's even down to like birth order, like first brother, second brother, third brother, fourth brother. This is your role in the family, and this is what you do. You get the sense that that's very important within this culture, and they use that too to create a story structure where you're kind of watching these three stories in parallel as they run through, and that's something that happens in all three of our films today, which is super cool. And it's also just good story structure. Like it would feel a little contrived if it wasn't so clearly part of the culture, which is great that the culture just kind of affords this really effective storytelling technique or story structure technique into these films, where you can run three lives in parallel that are connected through family. So there's a reason for them to interact. But also take very different directions because they're different characters with different arcs.
Yeah, that contrast is going to be really strong in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. But all three of these, it's a lot of sibling relationships. Like the parental relationships play a big part, but not to the extent where in like our Ozu films that we looked at, like the parental relationship was usually the main focus. Here, it seems to be the sibling relationship is the main one that is causing the friction and needs to be resolved by the end.
Yeah. One of the things that I did notice about this film, and I think we already kind of mentioned it a little bit in the intro, Jonathan, but this reminds me most out of all of the new waves we've talked about in other parts of the world of the neorealism movement out of Italy. Where it feels kind of very broken down. The shots feel a little more structured in the sense that there's definitely a very experienced hand behind the camera. But this movie in particular reminded me a lot of Roma Città Aperta, because it was kind of a city or an island in the aftermath of a war that isn't maybe entirely over because there's still violence going on, and a family there within dealing with that violence and how that kind of twists the natural growth of a family over time.
I think the main difference is probably that this film is not being made in the thick of the conflict. Like, I think that's what makes the Rome Open City trilogy so unique, is that it was being made during World War II, and this has a lot of that rawness in it in the story and stuff like that. But it definitely feels like there's been time to kind of come to terms with what's going on in the actual story.
Yeah, and this is definitely made after the White Terror, as it's called, but not super duper far removed from it. So definitely everybody in this movie was affected by it in one way, shape, or form. Like, it's in the recent past of the history of this island. And in fact, I think the island was effectively under martial law after the Kuomintang government fled the Civil War and arrived on Taiwan. From the time they arrived in like the 40s to the 1970s, like it was a long period of time. And this is made in like 89, so just afterwards. And at this point, like the government had basically been reformed and had set up centers to kind of like repay the citizens and deal with issues relating to those affected by the White Tower, and kind of, work to reparate any damages that were caused or could even possibly be fixed after the end of the White Terror. So yeah, it's definitely a trauma that is being explored by people on the island who had kind of lived through it or been affected by it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something else, Jonathan. Are you familiar with the concept of holowave, like the aesthetic?
I don't think so.
It's a very popular aesthetic in a lot of artist communities at the moment. It typically has a lot of Asian influences in it, but not necessarily. People relate it a lot to anime, although that's not necessarily a one-to-one either. And the best definition I've ever heard of it is holowave is something that can evoke a nostalgia for a memory that isn't necessarily yours. So some kind of
Is
image
this
that
similar
makes
to
you
like
feel.
chill hop? I just Googled it like super
Yes,
quickly.
yes, yeah. No, that
Okay.
is, yeah, no, that is part of the Hollow Wave aesthetic as well. It is typically something that can evoke wistfulness for a time and place or setting that you weren't there for, but is so, but evokes certain details that make you feel as if you were there. So it kind
So
of plays.
anytime that I hear Howard Shore's concerning hobbits,
I guess, except you that is part of your past though, right? Like not the hobbits, but like you've listened to that before.
oh, I see what you're saying.
So Hollow Wave is like
Something that you've
looking,
completely never experienced.
yeah, completely you've never experienced. So a lot of the times when I see images of Hollow Wave posted, it'll be like, two people sitting on top of like a hill at sunset with the remnants of like a picnic or a meal behind them, and the wind's blowing, and they have like this wistful look on their face, and there'll be like a fragment of a sentence on the bottom of the screen, like "I wish I knew it was the last time" or something like that. And it's enough to put you in the moment and make you feel wistful for it without giving any context for the story. And here, obviously, there is a context. Like in City of Sadness, there is context for everything that happens, but a lot of it feels kind of like a proto Hollow Wave version of essentially what Ozu does. Because
Especially the stuff with like the deaf brother.
Yeah.
Because his stuff is much more contemplative than the rest of the story.
Yeah. Anything that makes you, and you mentioned before, like how we kind of have these non sequitur almost shots where we just see somebody like hanging up laundry on a clothesline. Mm-hmm. And that feels very Ozu, but it isn't used necessarily for ellipsis so much as it is used in this film to put you in the time and place of what's going on with this family. Like, I think on the surface, like the most direct reason for that stuff being included in this film is that it makes these characters feel real. It gives them context within their life. Like you see that they do exist. They don't just exist in the dramatic moments. These characters exist when they do laundry, or when they look out a window, or when they look at the photos they used to make. But they don't necessarily add anything to the story beyond that sense of time and place. Mm-hmm. But the way in which it is done here kind of evokes that idea of like the Hollow Wave aesthetic to me, where you're kind of you can feel the wind in that scene. You can almost smell the laundry in that scene. Like you can kind of feel these characters' lives without ever having lived them. And you can feel their sadness over the course of the film, which is nice because typically the goal of the film, on some level, is to evoke empathy for something within the context of the film. And very often, some of our characters is the goal. In fact, I would say 90% of the time that's the goal, is to evoke empathy for one of the characters, if not multiple characters over the course of the film. And this does it not just emotionally, but also in the sense of time and place. It gives us nostalgia for the past within these characters' lives without us ever having experienced their lives outside of the images on screen. And one other thing that's key to that, and we see over the course of all of these films, maybe to a less extent in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, is that they cover a long period of time.
Yeah. Also, going along with kind of building empathy for the characters, I kind of just want to bring up, oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher this. Tony Shuai Lung, who is our protagonist, the deaf brother, but he's also kind of, just when we're talking about Taiwanese New Wave, specifically second New Wave, I think, but throughout the whole thing, like he's in a lot of these movies, and he does a really good job in this one, playing a deaf character, which was really interesting because he. Instead of having some kind of sign language or something, he literally just has to write whatever he's thinking, and he's writing back and forth. But it's also interesting because he kind of takes, like I was saying before, he kind of takes a back seat for a lot of it. You feel like he's just sort of getting carried along by the storm that is the rest of his family. But he's never really under fire from his other siblings, who are always at each other's throats for various reasons. And yet at the end, when he, takes the simplest political stand, he ends up getting arrested. And at that point, we have built up so much sympathy for him that we really feel it by that point at the very end of the movie.
Yeah. I actually I like that, because it kind of goes along with the idea of this being like a grounded, real world narrative, and kind of experiencing it that way. Because one of the things that I think we don't mention a lot in this, at least at this angle, is that protagonists have to be so active, right? Like they have to be almost like unrealistically active in their own lives in order to make movies work. I actually see that a lot with people who are starting screenwriting. Like it's almost unnatural how gosh darn troublemaking protagonists have to do in order to make a story function.
Well, it's like the big criticism with Raiders of the Lost Ark. You've heard the thing where, is Indiana Jones really the protagonist? Because the story would have turned out the same if he wasn't there. Like, okay, but yeah, he's the protagonist. He's our center character.
Yeah, he's definitely enough of a troublemaker to carry it. But yeah, no, it's definitely, I feel like it's almost just a more realistic portrayal of what humans actually do. Like, I could act like a protagonist for maybe one day, and then I'd be like, okay, I need to sleep in and like take a nap in the afternoon the next day. Maybe that's because I'm old now, but who knows? But yeah, it's a nice way to kind of have a character in there that acts a little more down to earth than the rest of them.
Mm-hmm. And that other thing, like making him kind of so sympathetic and making us relate with him so much, also makes the political danger really kind of strike home in a way that I kind of started to feel towards the end of the film. I was getting Army of Shadow vibes, where there's just like constantly danger around every corner. Like you try to just live a normal life or, have some kind of stand, but then you're going to get snatched up out of nowhere. And you never know when it's coming, especially whenever he's in the prison and not sure if he's about to get taken to a different cell and shot or released or what. A lot of similar things from Army of Shadows. Obviously, the conflict was very different, but similar kind of a tone, especially with the really slow pace and all that.
Yeah, no, certainly. It's surprising that it ends up being so tense with as slow as the pace is.
Yeah.
And it definitely keeps its focus on the lives of the family without getting overly sidetracked by the violence that happens. Not that the violence isn't important, but it doesn't suddenly become like a war movie partway through. I also really like and appreciate the fairly wide shot tendency in these films, specifically this one.
I think it was this one that I got through like 80% of the movie, and I realized I don't think there's been a single close-up.
Yeah, no, this one's almost entirely done in wide, very long takes.
Yeah.
Which is something else that contributes to this feeling like a memory to me.
Yeah. You feel like you're standing on the outside constantly.
Yeah, exactly. Like I feel like I'm watching things that have happened more than I'm watching things that are happening. Like this movie kind of, you watch it in the past tense in a way. You're just ever so slightly removed, and you have that fuzzy feeling when you watch part of it, which might be helped along by the fact that it's not in, like, I have to read subtitles for everything. But yeah, it definitely gives it that memory-like impression, which is another thing that kind of led me down the road to calling this proto-hollow wave.
Yeah.
In some regards.
Yeah, Yi does that a lot too, and we'll get to that. But Eat, Drink, Man, Woman is definitely the most it's the most conventionally filmed.
Yeah, it is an active, tense film.
Well, are you ready to move on to Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, Alex?
Yeah, you know what? Let's do that. Let's move on to Eat, Drink, Man, Woman.
All right, Jason, take it away.
Eat, Drink, Man, Woman from 1994. In 90s Taipei, Mr. Chu, a master chef and a widower, has 3 unmarried daughters, for whom he cooks a special elaborate family dinner for each week when they each give announcements about changes in their lives. The oldest daughter, Hsiao-Hsien, is an ardent Christian and school teacher who claims to have had her heart broken long ago and thus remains single, but there might be other reasons for her barriers against intimacy. The middle daughter, Hsiao-Hsien, is a successful career woman pulled between a promotion abroad, romantic relationships, and a worry for her aging father being left alone without a daughter to cook for him. The youngest daughter, Jian-Ning, is a college student who ends up in a love triangle with her friend's ex-boyfriend. As each character deals with their own trials, they come together at the table to discuss and more often argue about their lives, along the way challenging narrow definitions of their supposed roles within society.
We have both seen Ang Lee movies before.
Yeah,
but
we've seen other Ang Lee movies.
I think the only Taiwanese Ang Lee film that I've seen is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which is
Very
pretty
different movie.
Western. Yeah, and it's pretty, popular even from a Western point of view.
Yeah.
But there is a period of time
I'll say
where
it's kind of different. It's a different genre, but it still feels like an Ang Lee movie. There's a lot of character drama in
I
Crouching
will
Tiger,
say,
Hidden Dragon.
Yeah, and I will say Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, I'm trying to think. So, I mean, I haven't seen all of Ang Lee's films, but the ones that I have seen have been his more fantastical ones, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Life of Pi, which we also covered on the podcast.
Did he do that Mission Impossible movie? Didn't he do the second one that wasn't that good?
I don't know if he did Mission Impossible, but he did the first Hulk movie, which wasn't that good.
Oh, yeah.
That might be what you're thinking. But so that was very fantastical.
He also did Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, he did Brokeback Mountain,
which is
and then
like totally out of left field.
So random. And then more recently, he did Billy Lyndon's Halftime Walk and stuff like that. But
that's right.
Of the ones that I've seen, they're usually more action-packed and fantastical and that kind of thing. So Eat, Drink, Man, Woman was a huge change of pace as like a family comedy, dramedy kind of a thing. So it was really interesting to see, and from his Taiwanese period. But this one, I think, demonstrates the most what you were talking about of the story being driven along parallel lines of each of the different characters, because we have 3 different sisters. They all have their thing. We have the oldest sister, who's the pious one. She's a Christian. She's got her values. We've got the middle sister, who ends up being the protagonist, which you don't really realize at first, but she kind of takes over the story by the end. But she's, she's got this big career, she's got a lot going for her, and we end up realizing that she had kind of wanted something different from her life, and that kind of thing. So she has a lot of depth in that sense. And then there's the younger sister, who's just kind of young and wild, and that's her thing. Or young and impulsive? I don't know. But bringing them all together is their father, who is a master chef. And so there's like this attention to detail and like this high level of like this high bar that they all feel like they're reaching towards, because their father is one of the best in the world at what he does. And so they all kind of feel that, especially, again, the middle sister, who is our kind of protagonist. But the story is being driven along by each of those sisters and what their personalities are.
Yeah. No, the story structure on paper of this movie, and in effect, I think I just said on paper because that's just when structure seems applicable. It's just so dang good. It's such a good setup for for a family drama, for a character drama.
I think my main criticism with the structure would be that the youngest sister and the oldest sister, like, they just drop out of the story. Like when they're out of the story, they're just like gone. It happens so quickly. It's not really a gradual
But I feel like that's the point, though, right?
Yeah, that change happens quickly.
Because this film almost directly feels like the idea of 2 of the Ozu films we watched, where a widowed father. It definitely follows that Ozu idea of daughters' responsibility to fathers, but also the idea that when a woman gets married, she basically like freaking bounces out of the family and becomes a part of her new husband's family.
Yeah.
Which was one of the things that confused me at the start of watching those Ozu films. Was like, well, I mean, like, she can get married and still hang out with her dad, except in reality, like, it's presumed that she'll have so many obligations to her new husband that she'll just never be able to see.
Yeah. But in this one,
father.
the dad doesn't have the problem of not being able to cook for himself.
No,
So-
that's true. Yeah, no, he's an expert cook. I was so hungry
Oh
during-
my gosh.
During this movie.
Those food montages are just spot on.
Which I will also say, because we've kind of already been comparing this to Hollow-Wave and through its extent anime has done this interesting trend in the past 5 years where there's just all these cooking montages all the time. And it's drawn, but it makes you so freaking hungry.
Well, on the documentary side, I thought a lot of Jiro Dreams of Sushi, just because.
Yep, that too.
Yeah, I mean, that movie's just all about cooking these elaborate Asian dishes.
But yeah, when the point is that when they take those life paths, make those decisions to get married, or they're having a baby, so they have to get married.
Yeah.
They're gone. They're done. They're gone. They've moved on to their other part of their life, and the father's left behind.
But we do see beyond that more than we do in Ozu films, because we do get moments where they go over to each other's house or whatever, and at the very end, we just kind of see where all their lives are.
What did you think of the twist at the end of the movie?
There were a lot of twists in this movie.
Well, the one where the father reveals something at dinner.
Yeah. So okay, I guess we're going all the way there.
Because that one I didn't see coming at all.
Which is completely the point. Because so this movie is like built on a red herring. And I'm going to put down a spoiler warning here. This movie is actually very easy to find. It's on Hoopla, if you have that through your library. It's on Vudu with ads. It's on Tubi, I think. So if you're interested in watching it, go check it out. But
you also don't need, like, it's easier to comprehend than a City of Sadness.
It's really traditionally made. And
yeah, all the information is there on screen. There's no it's show don't tell, but it's also not imply don't show.
Yeah. But it does take you for a ride, because there's this whole thread. First of all, Alex, I don't know if the father had COVID or what, but I'm not exactly sure how taste works, if it just goes in and out. But there's this whole thing where the father is losing his sense of taste. They think he might be going senile. He might not be able to take care of himself or cook because he can't taste anything anymore.
Sometimes you just get a cold, and if your nose is messed up enough, you can't taste anything.
Yeah, that could be it. But so yeah, they're very concerned about the father's health, and the daughter sees him at the hospital at the cardiovascular area, and she doesn't want to ask him about it, but she suspects there's something wrong. And then at the very end of the movie, he gets up and makes an announcement, and there's the other lady who's just so outspoken and so loud. Who's there, and they think that he's going to get married to her so that the daughters won't feel obligated to stay with him. And then he gets up and proposes to that lady's daughter, who's the same age as his daughters. And you're just like, mind blown.
For some reason, you kind of get this idea that he's given up on
that he's going to settle
over the course of the movie, or not even settle. Like, I don't think marrying the older woman would have settled. But I would have been settling. But I also think that, he kind of seems depressed over the course of the movie, where he's like, man, I'm going to drop dead at work one of these days.
Because his
friend literally drops dead at work.
That was so sad.
It was really sad. It was also really impactful for his late in life crisis that he's having.
Yeah.
But also, I love the moment where he's like, I'm going to marry this younger woman. One, because it's such a twist. Two, it kind of makes sense in a way, because it's him saying, no, I'm not done with life. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to grab it by marrying this younger woman, which is also completely crazy in the context of the scene, because I think the older woman immediately passes out or something.
Yeah. everything blows up at that point.
It's so dramatic. If you look at the things that happen on paper, it doesn't sound like it would make a super dramatic movie because it's all like, it feels like it should be low-key character drama. But it's such a roller coaster when you actually go through all of it because you're just in the shoes of all these characters. You have empathy for a lot of them. Of course, in the context of certain scenes, they change who they forefront empathy for. Like when you're in the group scenes, like the every week they have that family dinner together, him and his 3 daughters. Mm-hmm. You always feel like you're in the
by the family dinner, he means like 5-star feast.
He's like a celebrity chef who prepares like 20 dishes
for his family
What, like, there's no way they eat all that food. I'm sorry.
No. But they talk about that too.
But when they're in that scene, it feels like you're focusing on the empathy of the father and I can't remember the order of the daughters, but the one who's working, the one who's
the
like
middle daughter,
woman, the middle daughter.
It took me a while to figure out which one, if the Christian daughter or the working woman daughter was the middle one, but I think the Christian one is the older one.
That makes sense. Yeah, because she's been an adult long enough to have some big romantic disappointment.
Yeah, well,
and
kind
still
of
be working. Kind of.
But yeah, and then at the end, she flips her wig and literally changes her hair to be the exact same as the middle sister, and then I was getting really confused.
Yeah, but that was also, I think, intentional.
Yeah.
But yeah, to finish what I was saying, in the group settings, it feels like we're forefronting those two. But when we're in the, I guess, B plot and C plot of the oldest daughter and the youngest daughter story, we're definitely forefronting their empathy over the course of those settings, which is just it's just kind of masterfully handled because those characters don't fall by the wayside, but they also don't become so big that they steal away from your central A plot of the movie. Also, just real quick, the final, the closing, I really like the closing lines of this movie, and it feels very Ozu at the very end.
Yeah, when she's
I think the final lines are literally daughter and father, and they're just saying it together when they're like left alone. Like,
because she makes a dinner for him, and then he's criticizing how it tastes, and then they realize that he can taste, and so he doesn't care. He's like, give me more. But yeah, again,
he's not done yet.
What's the deal with the taste going in and out? I don't know, but I don't taste as much food as he does.
I mean,
apparently.
It could literally just be a sinus infection. It's
not COVID.
Yeah, I don't think it's COVID in 2000 or 1994.
Yeah, so one thing I do want to bring up, because there's almost a 1-to-1 that gets taken in a very different direction in Yi Yi, but it's the youngest daughter's plot, which is arguably kind of like the least important, but the idea that the youngest daughter works at a fast food restaurant, which is just ironic as crap to begin with. Actually, I think it's McDonald's. It's McDonald's or Burger King or like a prominent fast food chain. And her friend at work has this thing with a guy who always comes and leaves her notes and stuff, and she's playing hard to get, and she says she doesn't like him anymore and she wants to move on. And so then the youngest daughter's like, oh, okay. And then she starts seeing the guy, then the friend finds out and is distraught and all that, and then younger daughter ends up getting pregnant from the guy and has to leave the family. But that whole thing of like kind of stealing the ex from the best friend comes back in Yi Yi and takes a very different turn. But I thought it was so interesting how similar those plot lines were. Yeah, no,
I think, definitely I think they're taking from some of the same cultural ideas.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they're related. I just think that it's a very interesting coincidence.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point.
But yeah, anything else about Eat, Drink, Man, Woman?
Well, I think the most important thing that we need to point out that isn't necessarily related to this film on its own, but so much as the context of the progression of the first new wave of Taiwanese cinema into the second new wave, because that's still the framing idea, is that this movie is
second new wave now, right?
Yeah. This movie is dramatic, and there's certainly tragic parts in it, but this movie is also funny.
Yeah. I mean, it's a comedy. It has dramatic things, but I don't know if I would call it a drama.
I would call it a character drama in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a tragedy. In fact, if we were talking specifically in the traditional sense, like Greek definitions of tragedy versus comedy, I would put it in the comedy category.
Oh yeah, it's definitely there. So yeah, I mean, it may be a dramedy in modern parlance, but I mean, yeah, I call it a comedy. Just because some of the things are just kind of just like a little over the top. I mean, some of the character interactions are comedic and they have situational comedy and stuff like that, but they're just like enough heightened to make it reflect on real life in a way that makes it look ridiculous, which is the heart of comedy.
All right, Jonathan, with that, do you want to move on to Yi Yi from 2000?
Yeah, let's do it.
Jason, take it away.
Yi Yi from year 2000. The Hsiao family lives in Taipei, and the film covers a turbulent period in their lives following the story of various family members individually as they influence and support each other. The grandmother collapses into a potentially fatal coma near the beginning of the film. The middle-aged father goes through a midlife crisis when an old flame appears. His wife also goes through a crisis, realizing the recursiveness of her life. The teenage daughter falls into a dangerous love triangle, and the young son deals with bullies in the form of girls and a male teacher at school. And the uncle even ends up in a very strange and strained marriage love triangle of his own. Though their troubles may seem small on the surface, together they reveal the never-ending dance of life.
All right, Jonathan, so let's talk about Yi Yi. This is a big movie. It's so long.
You know what this movie does, Alex? I'm just going to jump straight into it. This movie encompasses life. I mean, that's literally this. Talking about structure. That's the structure of this movie. It starts with a wedding and a pregnancy and ends with a funeral.
It does. It does. And it literally has parallel storylines happening for, I tried to count them at one point and then I just gave up.
There are so many characters.
At least like 6 or 7 characters who are all at different stages of life. Like there's a young kid, there's a teenager. I think
this one did take me a while to figure out like who was related to who in what way. But I mean, the movie gives you time for that because this movie is nearly 3 hours long.
Yeah, I think I tried to sum it up by saying this is like, you get like the rich, deep complexity of a family story that would be told over like 12 episode season on Netflix.
And this isn't family. Like Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, we have 3 sisters and a dad. In Yi Yi, we're talking about a dad, mostly the dad, but the mom is in there for a little bit, and his 2 kids, but also their extended family. And so you've got to learn like who his brother is, who his brother-in-law is, who their kids are, who their old relationships were. And you've got to, it's like you're walking into someone else's family reunion and trying to piece all the pieces together.
It is. And you know what? This one, especially for people who don't speak Chinese, which at this point, I feel like I just need to learn Chinese. I feel like learning Chinese would almost be easier at this point. To continue watching these movies.
Regardless of the fact that Chinese, quote unquote, is not a language.
This is true. I'm trying to just Taiwan.
Is Taiwanese
Cantonese?
Mandarin?
I don't think it's Mandarin. I don't know. Let me Google this real quick because otherwise it's going to bug me.
Mandarin, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Mandarin. Oh, there you go. And it's a slight variant of the Mandarin spoken on the mainland.
There are actually English sections in this movie too, which
those are
caught me off
such a
guard.
blessing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so amazing. It was like, wait, I'm not reading right now. This is great.
Oh my gosh. So that first scene, this is like kind of tangenty, but the very first time that our main guy is meeting with the Japanese developer, so they switch into English for their common language, but the Japanese guy's voice is so deep and he's off screen when he starts talking, and he almost sounds like a cartoon villain. He's just so serious, and he's got this very deep voice. I was like, whoa, it came out of nowhere, but it was delightful.
Yeah, no. But yeah, all that is to say, this movie is, I will say, kind of hard to watch and focus on for 3 hours unless you're in a theater. So it's
I found it easier to stay engaged than A City of Sadness. I think because it was more character driven, and it had much less of like a political basis to it that
this
layer.
This isn't a criticism of the movie. I'm trying to make a pitch for people who are like, I don't like reading. I don't like reading subtitles in movies. I don't like long movies. And you know what? I get that. It's hard. ADHD brains. It's hard to focus on something for that long. I'm used to playing video games all the time. Like, it's hard for me to focus that long on a 3-hour movie. But you know what? It's freaking worth it. This is a movie this is a movie that rewards you for paying attention, in a way that actually reminds me of like a well-made video game in some ways. Because a big part of the kind of almost interactivity with the audience, because this movie definitely treats its audience as like a partner and not as a passive audience, is this kind of idea of moving beyond show don't tell into imply don't show. There's a lot of stuff that you just have to freaking piece together over the course of this movie from context clues. Like there's nothing's like they never say that, you know, the dad almost married Sherry or almost got together with Sherry, and instead he didn't, and now he's in the life he currently is. You just figure that out by watching it and piecing it together. Which
and
makes
eventually
sense
they get
because,
there, but they take their sweet time about it.
Yeah. And eventually, you know what, that makes sense, because, you know, if you had that history with another character, or another person, I should say, it's not like you would sit there and be like, hey, here are all the plot points from what happened between us. Which is, you know, one of the ancient storytelling mantras of all time, you know, about how to deal with exposition. Mm-hmm. But it's just to say, like, the way they treat the audience in here, like, you know, Edward Yang is basically says, yes, the audience here is smart. They can pay attention. They can piece together what happens. They don't need their hand held in order to piece it together. And then, if you pay attention, you go down this freaking roller coaster of a time in this family's life.
Because
when it so easily could have all fallen apart. And for some of them it does, but for a lot of them it ended up being okay.
Yeah. So here, I mean, I'm going to dance around this at first, but it's important to bring it up because without getting into it, the movie is setting up a huge plot twist, like for the entire thing. But you don't realize it you think, because the movie could carry itself on just the character drama without a plot explosion that happens towards the very end. And yet that is part of the reward of going through all of the various, you know, little personal interactions that happen throughout the film. But there's just so much to it. And it takes its time. It has so many of these very long shots and a lot of wide shots again. Like I remember, I think it's at the very, very beginning at the wedding when we're watching the groom, and one of the other older guys at the wedding just chugging beer or whatever, like out of pitchers. But we're like so far back. We're looking at this entire ballroom, and they're just like a couple of guys standing around this table, like doing this big drinking thing. I was like, usually when you're shooting people getting plastered, you're like right up in it. The camera's like moving all over the place. You know, you're kind of feeling that drunk party vibe. But here we're just kind of observing, which is again what the whole movie felt like, very similar to A City of Sadness.
Yeah, this one is very passive, like City of Sadness, but it's also very present. Like, I also don't feel like I'm watching memories at the same time. I kind of feel like I'm just a ghost in the room or a fly on the wall. I don't know why I said ghost in the room. That feels so morbid.
But it feels appropriate for some. I don't know why.
I feel like they're
right for the film.
Maybe we're just the ghost of the grandmother who hasn't become a ghost yet.
I think that's actually. I feel like that's actually really appropriate because that's the other thing is that the grandma is in a coma for most of the movie.
It took me a while to realize how big of a framing point that was.
She really is the anchor.
Because after you hear all of her children and everyone else react to her being in the coma and then to her eventual death, sorry, spoilers, you realize that they all just really rely on her. Like she could have fixed like everything apparently that happened over the course of this film.
Yeah.
But she wasn't there. So now suddenly the kids are left to their own devices, very poorly at that.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much that goes into this. There's a good half an hour where the movie turns into Lost in Translation almost exactly.
Which one?
You know what I'm talking about? Whenever he goes to
are you
Tokyo
talking
with
about
Sherry.
Oh, the parallel scenes. Oh, I love that. I love that sequence. It's like a parallel scene where he is kind of on a date with Sherry, and at the same time, his daughter is also on a date.
Yeah.
As part of like the love triangle she's involved in.
Yeah, which is the part that I brought up about Eat, Drink, Man, Woman. But specifically talking about NJ and Sherry in Tokyo. First of all, maybe you can answer this because you've seen this twice now. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to help me that much, but I'll try.
Why did Sherry go to Tokyo with him? Like, she wasn't there for the business meeting. Did they literally just meet to reminisce?
Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
No, that was just her being a human, man. I think
he called her specifically to invite her over there, but I didn't know if, because at some point,
it's the same thing that he's talking about at the very end, where he was like, I thought I could relive part of my youth and do it better this time, but it turns out I couldn't. Would have just made the same decision over again, and I didn't need to redo it.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Which was a really nice, his little relationship with Min Min. And first of all, the amount
Absolutely
of characters,
so good.
Yeah, the amount of characters whose names are symmetrical is really interesting.
Oh, that's very intentional.
Yeah, with Yang Yang, Ting Ting, Min Min. I think they called Adi Dada a couple times, but I wasn't sure about that. I think so.
Yeah, I think it depends on who's talking to him.
Yeah, they have
as
different
to what
names.
His nickname is. But yeah, I just love that scene where he's telling his wife that Min Min that. And they're not looking at each other, and there's not like this series of like really dramatic close-ups with like swelling music in the background like you would see in a Western film. It's just very understated and subtle, but she's just smiling without looking at him when he says that, and you get how happy.
But Min Min's part of that scene, I think I like Min Min's part of that scene even better because she has left towards the very beginning of the film. Because she feels like her life is the same. It's monotonous. She's not, contributing anything. Because she goes to talk to the grandma, and she's like, I have nothing new to say to her. Every day is the same. There's nothing different. I can tell everything that I do in like a couple minutes. And so she goes to a Buddhist monastery, and then she comes back at the end of the movie, and she's like, well, every day was the same there. And it felt the exact same way, except I felt like grandma, and everyone was telling me the exact same thing. Every day, and so I realized that maybe I don't have it off so bad. And I was like, if your life is feeling the same, going to a monastery is probably not the best choice.
Yeah. Like if you're looking for excitement in your life, monastery isn't like
it's not the first choice.
Maybe she should have gone to Tokyo. I don't know, but anyway, maybe they'll go to Tokyo together now. I don't know, but they were definitely. But
they had that. That was such a sweet moment though, where they both had come full circle.
Yeah, on a certain level, it's kind of like your basic midlife crisis that both of them are having, but at the same time, it's done so well, so humanly, so subtly that we both feel engaged as an audience and compelled by the payoff at the end. It's just so freaking human. I absolutely love it. All the characters feel so real. None of them feel like total a-holes either, which I really appreciate.
Adi was on the edge there.
Adi very easily could have become like the worst person in this movie, and he kind of came back from the edge after accidentally knocking himself out.
He was just very foolhardy. He wasn't really malicious. He was just kind of dumb.
Oh, he was young and dumb.
Yeah.
It's again, it's portrayed in this movie as a part of life.
Right. Like there are those people in your life.
In a way, I think we talked about this on some other film like a week or two ago. But in a way, the idea of coming of age is kind of BS because like it's something that happens over and over again throughout your life. Yeah. And we see that here throughout the entire course of the movie. Everyone's coming of age. except for Grandma, who's coming of death.
Oh gosh, jeez, you gotta go there.
Sorry, was that too harsh?
That was a little harsh.
But yeah, it's super important. Everyone's always having an arc. It's really dense. It's superhuman. Not super humanized, I should say, not superhuman like Marvel. It's subtle and real and dramatic in a way that you could see these same plot points happen in, like, I guess they would be in a rom-com or a family drama if they were, or like an Oscar Beatty family drama if they were made, if at all, in the US. But they
like
would be
Ang
kind
Lee
of
could
almost
have done this with a lot more energy, but
yeah,
there's a lot of thought in the slowness.
It would almost be too saccharine.
Yeah,
like it would almost be too lost within itself to become what this is, because this, in a way, almost feels timeless. Like the things that these characters experience. Yeah, sure, we have like this certain hollow-wave aspect where we're put so much into the time and place that we can feel the world and lives of these characters. But that's not to say that anything about the time and place are pivotal to how these characters act. In a way, the things they experience as humans are things that all humans will eventually experience in one way, shape, or form, regardless of the time and place they live in. And in that way, it kind of transcends that boundary of language, culture, and time.
Yeah. And
also,
then
did you notice that Yang Yang is just, it's Edward Yang as a baby?
Okay, I was picking up on that. For some reason, I didn't put the name together, but that completely makes sense. But I do want to talk about.
It's okay. There's like we're looking at like a 5,000 piece puzzle and trying to put it together. Like,
I was just fascinated by all the double names.
It's not something that you're really going to get, and not to mention Edward Yang he didn't do a lot of movies. He died a little young, and during the early part of the career, he didn't have his best resources at his disposal. But like, you know, what everyone really says is his true, like his best movie ever made is A Brighter Summer Day, and it is.
Oh, really? I thought Yi Yi was his masterpiece.
They're both masterpieces. Yeah. That's the thing. I would actually say he has like a masterpiece trilogy in Yi Yi, A Brighter Summer Day, and Taipei Story.
Okay.
But they're all long, and A Brighter Summer Day is freaking 4 hours long.
Wow.
Which I'm gonna try to watch that this week, Jonathan. But also, it's 4 hours free.
Have you seen it before?
I have.
Okay.
And I don't remember it that well. I think all of his movies are, and I've seen Taipei Story as well, but I think I'm gonna have to watch it again. Just because they're so dense.
Yeah.
And there's a certain, accessibility factor in the subtitles that make piecing together these essentially like a logic empathy puzzle over the course of 4 hours a little difficult. Which is, again, what I was saying when I said these movies are a little challenging and a little hard to get into, but very worth it once you do.
Yeah. But I do want to get into Yang Yang's story, because, I mean, NJ is the protagonist, but Yang Yang is the star. So Yang Yang is the little 8-year-old boy who is kind of just there while all of this family drama is happening kind of around him. And he's having a little bit of a coming of age / awakening kind of thing. But also he gets a camera at some point in the film, because he has this conversation with his dad where he's like, if I can only see what I see and you can only see what you see, then I'm only seeing half of the truth. How can I see everything? And so then his dad is like, well, that's what we have cameras for, because it's more objective. Which, if you've ever seen Errol Morris's standard operating procedure, there's kind of an argument to that. But regardless, he starts walking around with the camera, and then we find out that he's taking pictures of the back of people's heads, just like over and over and over again. And it's not until the very end of the film when he hands one to his uncle, Adi, and his uncle's like, hey, this is me. Why do you take a picture of the back of my head? And Yang Yang says, because you can't see it, so I'm helping you to see a part of yourself that you can't see. And then he just runs off. And you're just like, whoa, perspective shift, which is really sweet. And then he has this really great monologue at the very, very end, very last part of the film. So he's like the little child that just kind of comes in and sees things differently and uses the camera to do that. So I can completely see how that's a little Edward Yang. And also, NJ is played by a guy named Yen. So his name is NJ too. I wonder how much of this parallel there is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would say that the Yang Yang story is probably my favorite.
Oh yeah, I mean it's a smaller comparatively bit, but it's very poignant.
Probably could have been like a short film on its own, but put together within the greater context, it takes on so much more meaning.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at IMDb, and Adi and Dada are two different characters. Now I feel really bad.
There you go. It's okay. There's so many characters, man.
Yeah.
There's so many. And some of them are in like, maybe 2 or 3 scenes, but also their 2 or 3 scenes are spaced out by like 40 minutes because it's such a long movie. So you see somebody who you haven't seen in 40 minutes back on screen, and you're like, oh gosh, who are you? Let me look in the wiki real quick.
The Yee fan wiki.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Okay, Alex, I'm going to put down the spoiler warning here because this is kind of a big one, but I feel like we should talk about it. So if you're interested in this movie, it's on Criterion Channel. I actually saw it on YouTube in like 720, so you can find this movie if you're interested. But there's a big thing that happens at the end that we're about to get into. So if you're interested, pause now or skip to overall and then come back. So, Alex, this movie doesn't feel like it's going to be the kind of movie that it turns out to be. I guess just to get into it, there's like a straight up murder.
Oh gosh, yeah, that part is so out of left field.
But it's such a big deal. Like, oh my gosh. Okay, so at the very end of the film, we've got NJ's daughter who starts seeing this guy who was super obsessed with her next door neighbor in their big complex, and then they break it off, and so then she starts seeing him a little bit. They like go to a movie and they have some tension and stuff like that. Very similar to Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, except he starts acting really weird all of a sudden. And also the friend next door, her family has like a bunch of issues with like her mom is seeing her English teacher. So she gets really upset about that. And then we find out that, well, first of all, the way that it comes up is so subtle and genius because it starts with the trippy grandma scene where the Ting Ting, the daughter, has this moment. She's felt guilty for the whole film that she's the reason that her grandma's in a coma because she may have forgotten to take the trash out, so grandma went out to take it out, and it was too much. She wasn't supposed to be out of the house, and she passed out. So she's felt guilty about that, and she feels like the only reason her grandma is still in a coma is because she hasn't forgiven her for that. And then we have this moment where grandma is awake, and Ting Ting feels very relieved that grandma has forgiven her. But at the same time, that night, there's like sirens going on. We see Yang Yang getting woken up from some loud sounds, and then we see like the red and blue lights, and then we see police cars, but no one is saying what's happening until like Ting Ting is in the police station, and then we see on the news that the guy that she was hanging out with murdered the English teacher that the other girl's mom was seeing, but the girl was also seeing him, and so there's this whole like huge mess that just happened right next door that to this family that we're following all of their other issues, which suddenly seem very pale in comparison. But it comes out of nowhere. It's like not the focus, but it's so huge that it almost feels like a whole other movie could have been made about that family.
It does. Also, I feel like that's important because it kind of shows, and one of the points of the movie, in almost all these movies, is the sense that everybody you see every day kind of has this full, complex, rich life full of interconnections within their own family or their own group of friends that are going on at all times. And we're kind of getting that hint, like you said, of what's going on in this other apartment. And we get that's bad. And we see just how bad it is when that penny finally falls. Also, what did you think real quick, of that absolutely absurd bit on the TV when she's at the police station to give testimony.
I'm glad you bring this up.
Like the whole movie's so grounded, and then there's this one really weird bit.
It's like 2 seconds.
It's like a video game recreation of the murder.
Okay. So yeah,
I don't know why I'm laughing about murder. It's so
okay. So yeah, the news station is showing the crime scene footage. There's blood on the post. They're taking the mom out. She's like avoiding all the cameras, and then it's like, as the English teacher left the apartment, he was stabbed 4 times by the assailant. And then, it cuts to like a Street Fighter version of the crime where this guy the background in the quote unquote video game looks exactly like the apartment complex, but then he's just like, "Hua, ta, ta," and he's like kicking him on the ground.
It's very inane 2000.
I was like,
circa 2000 video game noises.
But yeah, you're right. It comes out of nowhere. I'm like, that can't be a common news thing. And literally the only way that I could kind of reconcile it in my mind is that there's the NJ's subplot of them trying to make these bad video games just for some quick cash. And I was like, did they like turn the crime into a video game, or like I don't know, but yeah, that maybe it is like a cultural thing that is a real thing, but I don't know.
They also showed on the TV like pictures either of the victim or the stabber. Like it's very strange.
I think it was the stabber. But so they first of all, they lead up to this through the whole film. Like once it happens, I was like, oh, I can see how this has been building. First of all, when we first start after the wedding, we follow Ting Ting around their apartment, and she looks out the window and she sees the murderer guy, as it turns out, and his girlfriend down on the street, and they're like hugging and kissing, and she's jealous of them, which is part of her whole story plot. But that starts like in probably the second scene, and then also we see her across the apartment window, talking on her phone. So we're setting up this family from the very beginning, and then when she does start going out with him and they go to a movie, and he starts having this conversation about why movies are important, and how like he says something like, my uncle says that since we invented movies, we live 3 times as long because movies let us experience way more of life than we ever would. And then he says, even if we've never murdered someone, a movie lets us all know what a murderer feels like. And I was like, oh, ha, 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 until that moment. And I was like, oh, this guy's been a psychopath from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, again, this movie is very intentional, but it doesn't feel like it's going to turn into a murder crime movie. And then that just comes out of nowhere. And you realize that, like, how dangerous of a situation Ting Ting was in when she was with him for, a couple weeks or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I feel like it kind of shows, like, again, kind of her story about her personal little coming of age as a teenager, where she's learning how complicated humans are and how the connections between things in the world really works. Also, I think my favorite part of her story is when the grandma rallies and her plant comes to life, because her plant hasn't been blooming at all. And that's even like a thing. Like her teacher makes fun of her for her plant not blooming, that she's taking care of.
The grandma didn't rally. That was in her head.
Well, I mean, in your version of the story, it is.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that scene didn't happen in real life.
Well, maybe it did.
Maybe it did. But, yeah, I was... The whole scene felt very kind of odd, and I'm pretty sure that was just Ting Ting kind of making peace with her.
She's forgiven herself.
Passing. Yeah.
Or realized that she didn't need forgiveness at all.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, That was also very interesting. Is that they bring up the plant at the very beginning with the teacher saying, over nurture can be bad for a plant. Sometimes you have to let it grow on its own, and that was kind of a thread throughout the whole thing too. Is Ting Ting is so caring that it can almost be smothering. So I mean, even towards herself, which is really interesting.
All right, Jonathan. Do you have anything else you want to mention on Yi Yi, or do you want to move into overall notes?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get overall.
All right, Jonathan. So the Taiwanese New Wave. I think it's easy to say that it definitely focuses on these down-to-earth narratives, the kind that we don't see a whole lot of in the West. Specifically, a lot of family
Not
narratives.
mainstream anyway, yeah.
Certainly not mainstream. Hardly not mainstream anymore. Now more and more independent films tend to venture more and more into genre filmmaking, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just this concept of humanistic drama is almost completely evaporated over here.
Or it doesn't feel very natural when it is tried.
Or it isn't very natural. And this all feels very natural.
Yeah.
Like none of it feels like, but not only are the characters in the stories down to earth, while still being complex and interesting, but the film work itself, like the camera work, the editing, is also all down to earth, realistic, and not drawing away from any other part of the story.
Yeah.
Like the camera work isn't flashy. They're not going into dramatic close-ups when people say something. People just say something, and you have to be paying attention, just like you do in real life, to everything that's going on around you.
Yeah, there'll be like an entire conversation around a dinner table, and I'll just suddenly realize, I think this shot has been going for like 2 minutes. Like this scene is just playing out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when you're paying attention, when you're watching it like we are, for semi-analytical purposes, you kind of pick up on those things. But if you're just kind of watching it as a film, it all just starts to kind of flow, and you just feel like you're experiencing it. The films don't need a lot of flash to carry them. They don't have to punch in on everyone's expression, because we're getting that through just the performances and the, what is going on in front of us. We're just kind of observing. We're just there with them. The other thing, last thing to kind of say regarding Yi Yi, as far as framing and stuff, is the use of like reflections and stuff like that, where we're watching a scene play out, but there's often like a superimposed element of usually the city or something if we're looking through a window. And so that's another way that just kind of like pulls us out and makes us feel like observers in these situations, which is a feeling that you get with all three of the films. Again, a little less so in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, but it's definitely kind of like just peering into someone else's life who could be, your next door neighbor or just, someone that you know.
Okay, Jimmy Stewart.
I mean, a little bit.
Yeah, so these are kind of hard movies to watch, like I said, and that's not a knock on them. It's just that they're not in a style that we're used to in the West, both with our attention spans and our fondness for stylistic cameras, which, again, I like. That's not a knock on stylistic cameras. I think there's people who do stylistic camera work really, really well, but sometimes it also ends up being trendy every few years to have really stylistic cameras, and then people are using it just to have stylistic cameras and not in a very effective way, and so it just feels silly. But this is, again, very minimalistic cutting, very minimalistic camera movement, if at all, and kind of understated acting in story structure. But good gosh, if you're willing to actually brew yourself that coffee, sit yourself down with a nice bowl of popcorn, or your 15-course Chinese feast, and watch one of these movies, then it is really worth it. They're so affecting. They're so good. They capture something about what it is to be a human as you change over the course of life that you don't see in a lot of other movies, which is really nice, in a really affecting way that I feel is really important. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. Go watch them. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Alex, this is like really random, but I found, and you're probably looking at this, but I found like one common thread throughout all of these films that was a little unexpected. And that was like references to Beethoven that just came up in every single one of them. And I was a little confused. I mean, it's like a little thing. Beethoven is pretty ubiquitous, but still it was like, huh, okay. After the second time, I was like looking for it in Yi Yi. And actually it had the biggest influence in Yi Yi because the grandma is like singing Ode to Joy, and then the Japanese guy plays Moonlight Sonata at the karaoke bar. But I don't know. That was just a little thing that I noticed in all of these films was Beethoven showed up, or at least a reference to him.
I did not notice that at all.
Yeah, I think
that kind of makes sense.
For one thing, I've been on like a classical music kick, so I was kind of paying attention. But like in the first movie, they were talking about the brother who went mad, and his wife who was convinced that he was going to come back was like, everything will be like it was. She cleans his study. He's going to come back. He's going to listen to Beethoven every day, or something like that. And then in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, I think one of the sisters makes fun of the pious sister because she likes Beethoven, or something like that, because she's into like Western classical music and stuff like that. And then, like I said, in Yi it comes up a couple times, but I don't know. It was just there.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of makes sense. There is a certain amount of classicness to these films. And I mentioned this with Yi as well. There is a certain like timeless quality to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like A City of Sadness is a 31-year-old movie, but it didn't feel necessarily dated besides the fact that it referenced certain history.
Mm-hmm.
And Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, and both felt like they could have happened like yesterday, basically, and not have been any different. Like there is a certain classic, timeless quality to these, which is really nice because they're so good that they deserve to be classics.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a little bit of technology in Eat, Drink, Man, Woman that gets a little dated, but Yi didn't focus too much on any of that kind of thing. They don't even show the video games, except for that one bit.
The kid uses like an old snap camera, but also like the Fujifilm roll that he buys looks exactly like the Fujifilm you'd buy today if you had a film camera, or if you have one of those new Instax cameras. I say new; they've been around for like 5 or 6 years now. But one of the newer fashionable Polaroids that are around.
Hashtag film isn't dead. What are we going to be talking about next time, Alex?
All right, next time we are going to be covering the Imagination trilogy, Jonathan, which is the 3 most prominent works by Terry Gilliam, the animator from Monty Python. So this is going to be a lot of fun. These are...
It's going to be bonkers is what it's going to be.
It's going to be absolutely absurd. These are way more accessible than anything in that we've covered on this episode.
As long as you can appreciate British humor.
That's true. It's going to be really weird. Well, Brazil's is one of those movies that is so high concept that it kind of melts your brain a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's also so I've
heard so many weird reviews of Brazil that I've been really excited and scared to watch it all at the same time.
It's not a not weird movie. So there's no way there's not going to be a weird review for it. But it does seem like a very Jonathan movie in a lot of ways, both the British humor and the kind of Twilight Zone edge to it.
Okay, I'm excited.
It needs more conduits. Needs more conduits. Anyway,
I'm scared to understand that reference.
It'll make sense. Anyway, the 3 we're going to be talking about are the Time Bandits, or just Time Bandits, sorry, from 1981, Brazil from 1985, and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen from 1988, all of which are completely absurd and a lot of fun to watch, and a good breather after a dense foreign language film episode. So I hope all of you enjoy those, and we will talk about those next time on the podcast. what's going on over on the Patreon podcast, Jonathan?
Yeah, so if you would like to support the show, we do have a Patreon where you can do that. You can join our digital community where we live stream our recordings on Discord and sometimes have Netflix parties and stuff like that. We also have a bonus podcast if you'd like to commit a little bit more to us. And over there, the last thing we talked about was Der Golem, a German expressionist film from 1920, 100 years ago, which was delightfully imaginative and kind of in the gothic horror realm, but has some caveats to it. But it was a fun conversation.
All right, Jonathan. That's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And I'm at the Blue Jay, 1994.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next time.
All right, see ya.
I mean, that's what my dog does. He stares out the window, watching everybody.
Is that what this film has
turned us into? The neighbor's been
into?
burying something in the yard. I don't know if I trust her, though. All right,
Grace Kelly will help you.
I mean, sure, I'll take it. She drove off that cliff, though.
Oh my gosh. Alex is going so dark this week.
Sorry, apparently I'm just really morbid today.
Jeez.
It's true, though. That's how Grace Kelly died.
Oh my gosh.
It was sad. Anyway,